Meet Diana, a devoted young nurse who gave everything for love. She supported her husband, Ransford, through years of school, sacrificing her dreams to build him. But when Ransford finally became a billionaire, his true colors emerged. Once broken and grateful, he was now a billionaire who saw Diana as nothing more than a servant. Stay tuned, for you won't believe what happens next. But if it's your first time here, kindly like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell to stay updated of our next upload. Now let's dive into the full story. Diana was a young woman with a heart full of ambition. At 25, she had already secured her position as a nurse at a reputable hospital in the city. She lived a simple life in the quiet suburbs of Lagos, finding joy in her work, which was more than just a job to her. It was a calling. Her life took an unexpected turn when she met Ransford, a young man pursuing his master's degree in economics. The two met one rainy afternoon at a cafe, where Diana was treating herself to a coffee after a long shift. Ransford, with his easy smile and kind eyes, struck up a conversation with her, and the spark was undeniable. The relationship blossomed quickly. They shared dreams, ambitions, and life stories. Diana admired Ransford's dedication to his studies, while he was captivated by her selflessness and compassion. It didn't take long before their connection turned into something deeper, and they became a couple. As their relationship grew, Ransford began to lean heavily on Diana for support. He was struggling financially, juggling tuition fees and living expenses. Diana, understanding his circumstances, didn't hesitate to offer a helping hand. She began to take on extra shifts at the hospital, using nearly 70% of her salary to support him. Despite the sacrifices, Diana remained optimistic. She believed in Ransford's potential, trusting that once he finished his education, they would have everything they ever wanted. But there was a cost to this trust. Diana had dreams of her own. She had plans to build a home for her family, a place where she could take her parents to live out their final years in peace. She worked tirelessly, but it felt like every step forward was met with a setback. Yet, Ransford assured her that their sacrifices would be worth it. "When I finish, we'll build a mansion," he promised her, holding her hand in reassurance. In the midst of the struggle, Diana felt a deep sense of purpose. She wanted to see Ransford succeed, and she was willing to carry the weight of their shared dreams. She poured everything into supporting him, believing that one day their lives would be better. But little did she know, this foundation of selfless love would soon be tested in ways she couldn't have imagined. The years passed, and Diana's life became a balancing act. Her work at the hospital was demanding, often requiring long shifts, but she continued to support Ransford, who still hadn't found a job after finishing his master's degree. Diana's bank account was steadily decreasing, but she kept her faith in him, convinced that his big break was just around the corner. As Ransford continued his job search, Diana made countless sacrifices. She would leave early for work, come home late, and even spend her weekends at the hospital. All the while, Ransford remained at home, his days spent in search of job opportunities. But it seemed like luck had abandoned him. The pressure on Diana grew. She had to cover all the bills, feed the family, and keep the household running. And yet, she never once voiced her frustrations. She believed in the promise he had made her. She loved him and believed that his success was just a matter of time. But as the months wore on, Diana started to feel the weight of their situation. She hadn't had time to visit her family for months, let alone make progress on the house she had started for them. The project for her parents' home seemed like an unreachable dream. Still, she was determined to make it happen, hoping that once Ransford's career took off, they could build the life they had always wanted. Diana's inner turmoil grew, but she kept it hidden behind a mask of optimism. She had Oliver, her young son, to think of, and Emma, her little girl, who had grown up so fast in the past few years. She needed to keep her family together to stay strong for them. But her body was beginning to wear down. The exhaustion from working 2 jobs, supporting Ransford, and raising the children was starting to show. Her health began to deteriorate, and the constant fatigue started to catch up with her. But even then, she didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. She had a family to care for, and Ransford was still in search of the job that would change everything. And then one day her phone rang. It was a call that would alter the course of their lives forever. Just when it seemed like Diana couldn't take on any more, something unexpected happened. Ransford, after months of relentless job applications, finally received an offer from one of the most prestigious companies in Nigeria. The opportunity was a dream come true. A high-paying role in a top financial firm, a position that would guarantee him success. Diana was overjoyed, but beneath her excitement, there was a lingering feeling of doubt. Could he really live up to the promises he had made? For the first time in years, Ransford had a sense of purpose. He was no longer just a student. He was a professional. Diana couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and uncertainty. The next few months were a whirlwind as Ransford threw himself into his new job, working long hours, attending business meetings, and making connections with influential people. Despite his newfound success, something began to change in him. Diana noticed it in the way he spoke, the way he began to hold himself differently. He had become more confident, but with that confidence came a growing sense of entitlement. He started to expect things that Diana wasn't prepared for. "You should stop working," he told her one evening, as they sat in their modest living room. "You've been doing enough. We don't need the extra money anymore. I'll take care of everything." Diana was taken aback. She had always worked, always contributed. It was part of her identity. But Ransford insisted, telling her that he wanted her to stay home, be a full-time mother, and take care of the house. He argued that their new lifestyle deserved her full attention. He promised that everything they had worked for, the mansion, the luxurious lifestyle, would soon be a reality. All he needed was her support at home. Reluctantly, Diana agreed. She had no choice, really. Ransford had given her a glimpse of the life she had always dreamed of, and she trusted him. Yet, as the days passed, she found herself feeling more isolated. The more she stayed at home, the more she felt her own identity slipping away. She had nothing to do but cook, clean, and care for the children, Oliver and Emma. She loved them dearly, but she couldn't ignore the sense of unease growing inside her. Months turned into a year, and Diana's life became a blur of household chores and endless hours at home. As Ransford's career blossomed, so did his wealth. He bought a bigger house, filled it with expensive furniture, and began to travel frequently for business. He no longer needed to rely on Diana for support. In fact, she had become more of a burden to him than a partner. At first, Diana didn't notice the subtle shift in Ransford's behavior. He was still kind, still loving, but something had changed. He no longer saw her as his equal. He was the successful businessman now, and she was just the housewife, a position she hadn't wanted in the first place. As Ransford's wealth grew, so did his arrogance. He started to belittle Diana, making snide remarks about her weight, her appearance, and even her work ethic. "You should really get up earlier to make a better breakfast," he would say, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're just a maid in this house." Diana's self-esteem began to wither. She no longer recognized the man she had fallen in love with. He had become someone entirely different, someone who saw her as a servant rather than a partner. He called her names like giant maid and lazy housewife. The playful teasing had turned cruel, and Diana was crushed. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. Oliver and Emma grew older, and their father became more distant. He was rarely home, always caught up in meetings and business deals. Diana found herself alone more often than not, her days consumed by chores, and her nights spent longing for the man she had married. As time went on, the divide between Diana and Ransford grew wider. He became more successful, accumulating wealth and influence, while she became more isolated. The household had been transformed into a lavish estate, but the love and respect that once defined their relationship were nowhere to be found. Diana spent her days cleaning and cooking, her identity as a nurse, as a woman who had dreams and aspirations, completely fading away. She had wanted to build a future with Ransford, But now, all she could do was watch as he lived his dream, while she was left behind. Ransford's behavior had begun to mirror the men she had once despised, the ones who saw their wives as possessions rather than partners. He told her repeatedly that her work didn't matter anymore. He didn't need her to work. They had everything they needed. "Why should you stress yourself?" he'd ask, dismissing her feelings. "You're just a wife now, and that's enough." Diana had once been a proud, ambitious woman. Now, she felt like a shadow of her former self. She longed for something more than the life she had been reduced to. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the overwhelming feeling of being trapped. Her appearance began to change as well. The stress of staying at home, the lack of activity, and the constant barrage of insults from Ransford took their toll. Diana had always been active, but now, without any outlet for her frustration or stress, she began to gain weight. She stopped caring about herself because Ransford didn't care about her. But deep down, something inside Diana stirred. She couldn't continue living like this. She couldn't let Ransford's cruelty define her anymore. She needed a change, and she was determined to find it, even if it meant breaking free from the life she had built for herself and her family. Diana's frustrations had reached a boiling point. Every day felt like a battle with herself, a war between the woman she used to be and the woman she had become. She was trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury and wealth, yet feeling more alone and worthless than ever before. One evening, after another hurtful comment from Ransford about her weight, Diana couldn't take it any longer. She locked herself in the bathroom, her tears falling freely as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, someone she didn't recognize. "How did I get here?" she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. The pain of being reduced to nothing more than a housewife, constantly ridiculed and belittled, had broken her. She had given everything to Ransford, her time, her money, her energy, and what had she gotten in return? A man who saw her as nothing more than a servant, a maid to be ordered around. Diana realized something that night. She couldn't stay in this marriage, not if she wanted to have any chance of reclaiming her life. But what could she do? She had 2 children, Oliver and Emma, whom she loved dearly. She couldn't just leave, not without knowing they would be okay. Yet, she knew she couldn't continue this way. She needed a plan, a way to get out and regain control over her own life. In her desperation, Diana confided in her best friend, Linda. Linda had always been a supportive, understanding presence in her life, and now Diana needed her more than ever. The two of them sat down, discussing possible solutions to her miserable situation. After a few hours of talking, Linda came up with a bold plan. It was risky, but Diana was willing to try anything at this point. Linda's plan was simple, yet devious. Diana would pretend to be sick, very sick, in order to manipulate Ransford into seeing just how much he had been taking her for granted. The goal was not just to make him feel guilty but also to get a break from the stifling life she had been living. If she could trick him into realizing how much she was doing for him and how badly he had been treating her, perhaps he would change. Or, at the very least, she could gain some time away from the household pressures. First, Diana was hesitant. Could she really go through with it? Was she truly willing to deceive Ransford in such a way? But the more she thought about it, the more the idea seemed like her only option. The plan was set in motion. Diana began to show signs of illness, complaining of dizziness and weakness, telling Ransford she had been feeling unwell for days. Linda had arranged for a doctor to be in on the plan, someone they both trusted who would be willing to play along. Ransford, concerned but still unaware of the plot, insisted they go to the doctor immediately. Diana put on a show of weakness as she was helped to the car, playing her part perfectly. She could almost feel Ransford's guilt creeping in as he rushed her to the hospital. He couldn't help but worry. Perhaps, deep down, he knew he had been a poor husband. The doctor, who had been briefed on the situation, played his part well. After running a few tests, he told Ransford that Diana needed rest and a change in lifestyle to recover. She needed to get out of the house, engage in physical activity, and start taking better care of herself. This was exactly what Diana needed, a way out, an opportunity to reclaim a piece of herself. Diana spent a week in the hospital, playing the part of the sick and weak woman. During this time, she reflected on everything that had happened in her marriage. She thought about how she had given up everything: her career, her health, and her identity, all for Ransford's success. Now that he was a billionaire, he had become someone she no longer recognized. Despite the pain of her situation, Diana also found a glimmer of hope. She realized that she could still take control of her life, even if it meant starting over. The hospital stay had given her the space to think clearly, without the daily pressures of household chores or Ransford's cruel comments. She could breathe again. Once she was discharged, Diana returned home, but things were different. She was no longer the submissive wife, quietly accepting her fate. She had a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to take control of her life. She wasn't going to allow Ransford or anyone else to dictate her worth any longer. The first thing Diana did was insist on going back to her nursing job, something she had always loved. She had missed the sense of fulfillment it gave her, the chance to make a difference in people's lives. Ransford was initially resistant, trying to convince her that she should stay home, but Diana stood firm. This time, she wasn't going to let him hold her back. She also started to exercise again, taking time for herself, and slowly but surely, she began to regain her confidence. The weight she had gained started to come off as she focused on her health and well-being. It wasn't easy, but it felt empowering to take those first steps toward reclaiming her life. As the years went by, Ransford's businesses expanded. He had gone from being the broke, unemployed husband Diana had once supported to a powerful, wealthy man whose influence stretched far beyond the borders of their home. Despite his immense success, something was missing. His marriage was falling apart. Ransford didn't seem to care much about the state of their relationship. He had grown accustomed to the comforts of his wealth and his position, and Diana's transformation, both emotionally and physically, didn't seem to faze him as much as it should have. His increasing arrogance and dismissive attitude toward her only deepened the emotional chasm between them. Then one day, Ransford came to her with a request. It was not an unusual one, but for Diana, it felt like the final insult. "Diana, I need your help with something," Ransford said one evening after dinner. His voice was cold, detached. Diana looked up from the book she was reading, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What is it?" she asked, her voice calm, yet filled with a mix of curiosity and weariness. "I need money," he said bluntly. "My businesses are facing some challenges, and I need additional capital to keep things running smoothly. I've spent a lot on expanding, and now I need to make sure the cash flow is stable. I need you to help me." Diana's heart sank. Her first instinct was to refuse. After everything he had put her through, after years of being demeaned, belittled, and treated like nothing more than a maid, how could he have the audacity to ask her for anything? But she didn't say anything immediately. Instead, she stared at him, thinking of the years she had spent sacrificing for his success, the nights she had stayed up late to tend to their children, the hours she had spent at the hospital and at home, managing everything while he was out making deals and climbing the ladder of wealth. I don't know," she said slowly, trying to gather her thoughts. "I've always supported you, Ransford. I've given up so much. I've worked hard, I've sacrificed for you. And now you ask me for more." Ransford didn't seem to understand her hesitation. He was too wrapped up in his own troubles to see the bigger picture. "You can't be serious," he said, the hint of impatience creeping into his voice. "We have everything now. Money, power, everything we could ever need. Why can't you help me just this once?" Diana took a deep breath, holding back the tears that were threatening to spill. She thought of everything she had endured in this marriage. The emotional abuse, the isolation, the way she had been made to feel small, insignificant, and invisible. And now he was asking for more. "I'm sorry," Diana said, her voice firm. "I've helped you for years. I've given up everything to support you. But I can't keep doing this. You've taken too much from me already, Ransford. It's time for me to think of myself for once." His face fell, a mix of surprise and anger flashing in his eyes. But Diana was resolute. She knew it was time to stand up for herself, not just for her own sake, but for the future of her children as well. The tension between them was palpable, but Diana held her ground. She knew the money Ransford was asking for was the last straw. She had been manipulated for far too long, and it was time for him to understand that she wasn't just his servant, his maid. His tool to use and discard whenever he pleased. A few days later, Diana made her decision. She would help Ransford, but on her terms. She didn't owe him another sacrifice, but she would give him one final lesson in humility and respect. "I'll help you, Ransford," she said after a long silence. He looked at her surprised, but Diana continued. "But I want you to understand why. I want you to realize that I've been nothing but loyal and supportive to you, even when you didn't deserve it. I want you to remember the years I spent working myself to the bone, raising our children, and sacrificing my own happiness for you." He nodded, though his pride seemed to hold him back from fully acknowledging her words. "I'm doing this not because I have to," she added, her voice steady, "but because I choose to. I've learned that life doesn't owe us anything. We make our own paths, and I'm choosing to take control of mine now." With that, Diana helped him with the necessary funds to stabilize his business. It wasn't easy for her, but she did it, not out of obligation but out of strength. She had learned that her worth wasn't defined by her husband's success or failure. Months passed. Diana's life slowly regained its balance. She continued working as a nurse, and she started to teach her children the importance of self-respect, of standing up for oneself, and of recognizing the value of hard work and perseverance. She taught them that love was a partnership, not a one-sided transaction. As for Ransford, he never truly understood the full weight of Diana's sacrifice, but he did learn one thing. Diana was not someone to be taken for granted. Her resilience and self-worth had become her greatest asset, and she would no longer let anyone diminish it. One evening, after everything had settled, Diana and Ransford sat down to dinner with their children. Ransford looked at her, his gaze softening for the first time in years. "Thank you," he said quietly. Diana met his gaze and smiled, but it wasn't a smile of submission. It was the smile of a woman who had reclaimed her life, her worth, and her dignity. And with that, Diana knew she had won. Not in the way Ransford had expected, but in the way that mattered most. By staying true to herself. Diana had endured a great deal, but in the end, she reclaimed her power. Her decision to teach Ransford a lesson wasn't just about revenge. It was about standing up for herself and her future. She reminded him that their marriage was meant to be a partnership, not a relationship where one person was subjugated to the other's whims. Through her journey, Diana learned that love and respect must go both ways. The story of Diana and Ransford shows that true strength comes from within, and that sometimes we must make difficult decisions to regain our sense of self-worth. Diana's resilience serves as a powerful reminder that no one should ever feel like a mere servant in their own life. It's never too late to reclaim what's rightfully yours.